Hello everyone, my name is Riley Finwood and this is my co-host Olive Woodard.
Hi.
And this is As Within, So Without, a podcast in which we explore esoteric belief systems, both metaphysical and spiritual, scientific and paranormal, philosophical and downright weird, unexplainable phenomenon happening in our world every day, all the time, forever and ever into that great unblinking void. Today's topic of discussion is reality itself. What is reality? Why do we always talk about trees falling when we discuss it? Who am I? Where am I? What year is it? Does it even matter? What better place to start than with more than you can chew for your first shot at podcasting? I've never been one to back down from a wheel on fire, and I ain't about to start today. So without further ado, let's play the music and rage against the dying of the light. For we go not gently, nay, into that good night.
Got all of that.
We're gonna edit all my coughing out.
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
Hello, everyone. Like I said, my name's Riley. This is Olive. Olive, who are you? Why are you here?
Hi, I'm Olive, writer, woo-woo enthusiast. I live with Riley, and I am the sometimes co-host of As Within, So Without, and I also do the blogs.
Yeah,
That's all you get.
We are quarantined together, and therefore our two minds combined create one brain cell. And between us, we're going to try and make sense of a question that we haven't been able to answer since we could think as a human race. So
I'd argue it's unanswerable, but that's a story for another day.
You know, if we had the answer, we would have, gotten a Nobel Peace Prize. We wouldn't have a podcast, but... So, before we get into that, there's something that happened to me today.
Yeah.
I was going on my walk, my daily walk, and I had this app downloaded from a couple of days ago called Randonautica. And anyone who is familiar with the Randonauts, it's a project, it's an experiment, and it's gaining more traction. But I found it on Reddit, as I find a lot of things. But basically, it's people going to random locations generated by an AI that is something called the Fadem Project. The Fadem Project. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's F-A-T-U-M.
Fadem feels correct.
Fadem feels correct, and if I'm wrong, I'm sure I'll be corrected. I'm just going to read it directly off their website. Imagine that somewhere near you, perhaps near your house, there is a place that you always go around without any reason. You have never been there, and probably do not even know this place exists. We call such places blind spots. Their existence is mathematically determined, since all our behavior has a certain share of determinism in it. Imagine that you toss a coin, it can fall heads, tails, or stand on the edge, but nothing other than these three outcomes will be taken as a result. The set of outcomes is determined by the coin itself. The dice cannot give you 2.5, because its sides are whole numbers. Imagine the same is true for our geographical routes. No matter what path we choose, wherever we decide to go, there is a limited number of logical chains that will guide our mind when choosing a route. Even if it seems to us that we act by chance, there is always a place where none of these logical chains leads us. So Randonauts generates these blind spots that you probably would never go to on your own. The key is that you set an intention before you go to this spot and just see what you find. And I did this for the first time today, and my intention was to empower myself, get a little courage, get a little jazzed up for my first recording of my podcast. And interestingly, it took me to a statue that was a bunch of steel beams interconnected together, and it had a plaque that was just talking about, the interconnectedness of all things, and, that was like, wow, I'm starting this so I can make connections with other people with like minds and unlike minds, because we're all stuck in quarantine right now. It's kind of hard to find new connections. Yeah. I was like, oh, that's pretty rad. And then around the corner was a lion statue. And it's weird because lions are one of my quote-unquote spirit animals, and I hate that term, but basically it's just lions are really, really important to me, and they symbolize courage. So I was like, that was very specific, and, you know, this was my first time doing it, and it did give me empowerment, and it was really, really connected to the episode itself. Mm-hmm. And I think eventually I want to do a whole episode just on randonauts. I think that would be really cool and really relevant, and I think I want to do experiments and film it and put it on the YouTubes. I think that would be really fun. So, yeah.
Strangely enough, that same statue I had also come across recently when I was on one of my longer walks. I had never been through this part of the city before. It's on a college campus, and I never actually set foot there. I ended up by this particular statue as well, and it caught my eye because it's very industrial, and I thought the connection to connectiveness was very sweet. But even beyond that is the fountain with the lion, and to the right of that, which really caught my eye, is this very long stretch of like a college green. But at the end of it, there's these zigzag lines of very old trees. And recently, when I walked through that path of trees, I had seen, like, some of the first butterflies I had seen all season, because it was finally like, very hot, very warm, and I thought that was cool. So, it's interesting to me that you also randomly sort of came by that statue before as well, so.
Butterflies are nice.
Butterflies are nice. Butterflies always make me a little more hopeful.
A little more hopeful.
Just a little bit.
Hallmark, call us.
Oh my god, thank you. Shameless plug for Hallmark. Hit me up.
Okay, so, reality. What is it? Well, we don't know. So where do we start? As much as I would love to break down the definition piece by piece and go through all the little caveats of each little subset, of each little subset, of each little subset into infinity, I kind of want people to listen to this, so
yeah.
For our purposes, let's just divide it into two main camps of thought, the first being realism, the other being anti-realism, or idealism. So realism, in short, means that there is an objective reality beyond our perceptions and beliefs. Things occur outside of us, they occur outside of our choices, outside of our senses and our thoughts. A tree falling in a forest does make a sound if no one is around to hear it. Why? Because obviously events occur all the time in nature without us there to witness them, right? A cloud can still produce rain over the ocean without anyone watching. The assumption that the universe still exists is a fundamental assumption in classical physics. Scientific theory is based on things that we can experiment and see with our own eyes. That's how facts are made.
Yeah, it's very visceral. You have to see it, touch it. It's what you see is what you get.
And I think we take it for granted a lot. That facts are built on our perceptions of things, and that's the only way we can take in the world around us is how we sense them. And we all agree that if, more than a few of us see the same thing at the same time, then it's there.
Yeah.
Barring UFOs for some reason.
For some reason. Wonder what that is.
Just kidding. Yeah, so that's realism in a nutshell. It's pretty straightforward. What you see is what you get. There it is. Boom, boom. Anti-realism, however, means that there is no reality beyond our perceptions and beliefs. We create reality. Our thoughts and feelings literally build the world around us, sort of like rendering in Minecraft, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, that's coming up, I promise.
So yeah, if no one's around to perceive the tree, it doesn't fall or make a sound because it's not there.
Unless
the
tree perceives itself.
Unless the tree perceives itself. We're not going to talk about that rabbit hole today.
Nope, gonna leave that one alone.
Anyway. So there's this mathematician, and I'll be honest, I don't know a whole lot about math and mathematicians, but his name is Martin Gardner, and he says this: If you wonder why scientists, philosophers, and ordinary people, with rare exceptions, have been and are unabashed realists, let me tell you why. No scientific conjecture has been more overwhelmingly confirmed. No hypothesis offers a simpler explanation of why the Andromeda Galaxy spirals in every photograph, why all electrons are identical, why the laws of physics are the same in Tokyo as in London or on Mars. So that's that about that.
To sum that up in a neat little box.
So the idea of realism versus idealism is one of the oldest debates in philosophy, dating back to classical Greece and probably to much older religious and spiritual traditions around the world. According to the traditional story, it created a rift between Greek philosopher Plato and his pupil Aristotle. Mm-hmm. And there's a painting. We will probably put a link to it in our show notes, but it's a pretty well-known painting. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. It's called The School of Athens. It's where, by Raphael, the angriest Ninja Turtle. Well, it's a bunch of philosophers talking and arguing amongst themselves. And in the center of the painting, Aristotle and Plato are standing together, and they've been interpreted as arguing about realism. Plato is pointing up towards the sky, towards the realm of abstractions and forms, of which our world is merely shadows, which is the allegory of the cave, which we are about to talk about. And Aristotle, in total disagreement, is gesturing towards the ground, arguing that the truth is right here, all around us. Hence, scientific method.
Yeah.
So, there are two general aspects to realism, illustrated by looking at realism about the everyday world of the macroscopic objects and their properties. First, there's a claim about existence. Tables, rocks, the moon, so on, all exist, as do the following facts. The tables being square, the rocks being made of granite, the moon being spherical and yellow. Arguable.
Arguable,
anyway,
but...
the second aspect of realism is about the everyday world, being that the macroscopic objects and their properties concerns independence. The fact that the moon exists and is spherical is independent of anything anyone happens to say or think about the matter.
Yeah, it just is that way.
Yeah, sorry, there's a moon. It's hollow and full of broccoli cheddar soup, but it's there.
It's there. I promise it's there.
Okay, so to help with all this, we're going to talk more about Plato. So let's just jump right in. Here is the basic rundown of the allegory of the cave. Plato has Socrates describe a group of people who have lived chained to a wall of a cave all their lives, facing a blank wall. Mm-hmm. The people watch shadows projected on the wall from a fire behind them,
yep.
And they name the shadows. The shadows are their world, their everything.
Yeah, the only thing they've ever seen are these, like, shadow animals. They have known nothing else.
And Socrates explains how the philosopher is like a prisoner who is freed from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are not reality at all, for he can perceive the true form of reality rather than manufactured reality that is the shadows seen by the prisoners. The prisoners don't want to leave the cave because they think it's stupid to leave the cave. Why would they want to leave the cave? They have all the shadows they need right here. I'm in my comfort zone, man. Don't pull me out of my cave.
Listen, I like my cave and I like my shadows. That's the way it's always been, and that's the way I would like it to stay.
Indeed. Of course.
Of course.
The prisoners managed to break their bonds one day, hypothetically, and discover that their reality is not what they thought it was.
Nope. They had no idea. Their minds were absolutely imploded.
They discovered, wait for it, the sun.
Right.
And how do you describe the sun if you've never seen the sun before?
How do you begin to approach that subject? What do you say? Can you say anything?
Ouchies?
Ouch? Yeah, that probably didn't feel great, honestly. Probably did not feel awesome.
Yes. Owie.
Ow.
Sunburn.
Immediate.
I'm immediately blind.
Oh, yeah. You wouldn't come back from that.
So the idea is that even if there was a reality outside of our current one, we probably wouldn't be able to understand it or perceive it in the way that it actually is, mm-hmm. because our senses are made for this reality.
Yeah. There would be something about it that would exceed our capabilities to even, like, digest the concept. There's no way for us to wrap our minds around that kind of thing. It just isn't accessible.
So yeah, basically, even if these interpretations are an absurd misrepresentation of reality, meaning right now, even if we are seeing something that's misrepresented through our senses, we can't somehow break free from where we are and see the true matrix for what it is.
The true matrix for what it is. The true truth.
In Plato's words, it's the realm of forms, which means that they're basically abstractions of the most perfect.
So
take it away, Olive.
Yeah. So Plato's theories of forms is that there is a certain kind of reality that is absolute, but it is what is essentially the personification of the purest forms of, say, friendship or love or faith, grace, anything that has a concept on this realm, but taken it to the highest, purest form. And in that way, those things are very real. They're real concepts to Plato, but they're called forms because it's still an abstract truth.
That have a physical basis in another realm.
They do, a physical basis in another realm. What that means to people can vary. I actually am a big fan of this particular theory, and I kind of see it as lights personally, but that's just, people will obviously see things in a very different...
Everyone's going to have their own way of thinking about things, forming concepts in their mind. We had this conversation last night about synesthesia, and how some people can see colors when they listen to music. There was that thing that went viral a few months ago where some of us realized that some people don't have an inner monologue.
Ooh, that was a wild video, I tell you what.
Yeah. A woman was interviewed. She was one of those who doesn't have an inner monologue, something we kind of take for granted, most of us. And she was asked, how do you read? And she said, I don't hear the words in my head. I see a concept map, and the words sort of organize themselves into their grammar structure, and I sort of filter them through what you said. It was like a Google lens.
Yeah. Yeah, it's as if you have this screen over your mind. I laid in bed, by the way, last night thinking about this until it made sense, and I think I got a relatively decent picture of it. So it's like you see this Google lens in front of your face, and
we are not sponsored by Google, by the way.
No, but Google.
We have no sponsors.
But Google, if you for some reason feel like getting involved with this, we have an email. So you have this screen, and on it are the verbal cues that are coming at you, the sentences that you hear. But instead of processing them, and especially when you're reading them, you are taught to read when you're young, right? So you recognize... No, you don't know how to read? No, Jared, 19? No.
I'm Jared, I'm 19, and I never learned how to read.
So you know what the words look like, you know what they mean, but in order to process them when you're reading, you have to then put them through basically a sentence map where you have to, okay, so this is the beginning of a sentence. I know what that looks like. I can't hear it, but I know what it looks like. Instead of it being auditory in somebody's head, it's purely visual. Does that make sense? So you see the sentence, you know what the word means, you know how to organize it because of the way you've been taught. You know grammar. You know how to read. You know what these words mean. You don't hear them. It's just that you see them, and by sight you know what they mean.
So yeah, that is Plato's allegory of the cave in a really, really condensed nutshell. And it leads us right into anti-realism, because aspects of that are very anti-realist. It is anti-realist. I mean, we're looking at shadows on a cave wall right now, and, we have no way of finding out what's happening on the other side of the wall, or the other side of the fire. We are mere mortals. But I really want to talk about, we talked a little bit about the scientific method and classic physics, how they're built off of the idea of realism, and that's how we create facts, right? That's how we decide as a collective what is true and what is not true. And that's been our thing for a long time now. It's not perfect. Obviously, we thought the Earth was flat, and oh my god, we're not going to talk about flat Earth theory. We may do it in a future episode, but I think that's been done to death.
If any flat earthers are listening, I just want to say I love y'all. Incredible.
I have love in my heart for you, but I don't agree with you.
I respect the heck out of you.
I respect the audacity, is what I'm going to say. But
you know what? That's fair. I love the creativity, honestly.
The audacity. Anyway, focus. I really want to talk about quantum physics and how it sort of is flipping all of that on its head as we speak. So we can't really... The first thing I want to talk about is Schrodinger's cat. Did I say that correctly?
You did.
Schrodinger. So there's this guy.
You may have heard of him.
There's this guy. His name is Erwin Schrodinger. He's an Austrian physicist. He had this thought experiment that if you put a cat in a box with a machine that had a 50% chance of killing the cat within the next hour, that the cat is going to be both alive and dead until you open the box. Mm-hmm. And this is something called superposition. It's the idea that a particle exists in all states until it is observed, mm-hmm. which is a very interesting thing to me. It's always been interesting to me, and quantum physics really, really takes into the account the role of the observer and how the observer causes the waveform to collapse into an outcome. So basically, everything exists in all states until you look at it. So the tree can't fall into a forest until we look at it and decide that it's fallen.
I was thinking about this last night, and it kind of reminded me of like the Toy Story universe, where like they're all alive and living their own lives until someone outside of that reality looks at them, and then they're toys again.
Oh, I never even thought about that.
Yeah!
You know, that's how I used to think about my Beanie Babies growing up, is I cared so much for my stuffed animals and my Beanie Babies that I would, after playing with them, I would make sure to put them in a very, very comfy environment.
Yeah.
And tuck them in, because I knew that once I turned away, they would come alive. And I needed to take really good care of them. And then I got older, and my mom threw them all away. And she didn't mean to. But they're all gone now.
I had a truly embarrassing number of American Girl dolls growing up that I did the exact same thing with. I truly, and I may or may not still to this day, believe that they have, they're sentient. They care. And I know that they are still at my parents' house gossiping with each other. I always assumed they kind of, talked about me behind my back, but that's a story for another day.
Who doesn't, Olive?
Hey, I'm delightful.
Yes. Superposition, something I really like to talk about. I have a very surface level understanding of it, but I'm not a quantum physicist. I am just a very enthusiastic?
That's a word you just made up. Love that for you.
Enthusiastic.
There you go.
Hobbyist. A funny thing about Schrodinger is
this is good.
that it turns out that his own theory scared him so much that he gave up quantum physics and became a biologist. Let me see if I can find what it says. Where did I see that?
He freaked himself out so much with his own theory that he just up and metaphorically flipped the table.
Yes, he said he said it was philosophically terrifying.
Can you imagine?
Yes, it is philosophically terrifying.
He's scared the absolute mess out of himself. Oh, poor thing.
There's something I forgot to look up. I want to talk about I'm sure you can hear me clicking, I apologize, and typing. I want to talk about the double slit. I typed in double slut as I typed in double slit. Double slit experiment. 1961 was when they did this. Mm-hmm. So pretty recently. So this one's cool. Let's pretend you have electrons that you can shoot out of a little cannon at a panel that has a slit in it. And then there's a wall on the other side of the panel. Ideally, the electrons would go through the slit and form a line on the back wall on the other side, correct? But if you put two slits, hypothetically, the electrons would make two bands when you shoot them through on the other wall. But what really happens is something that is formed when water is pushed through two narrow slits. They form a wave. The electrons are bouncing off of each other and forming an interference band on the other side of the wall, and I'm sure I'm going to put a diagram of this in the show notes if you're interested in, because it's hard to explain what it looks like. But basically, this suggests that electrons act like waves. They act like particles and waves. So when we tried to measure this, when we tried to observe it and look at it, the electrons behaved like regular matter. They formed two bands on the opposite wall, suggesting that the electrons change its behavior based on the presence of an observer.
Yeah.
So this means reality acts differently when we're there to perceive it.
Theoretically. Allegedly.
Allegedly.
I'm just going to throw in allegedly here in case God tries to sue us.
So that one is super fun to me. And it does concede that, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, we can't answer that based on the findings of this experiment. We can only suggest probabilities. The electron in waveform suggests superposition, which we just talked about, or how probable it is to appear in any of those spots by the time an observer is there to perceive it. It is probable that a tree makes a sound impact, but we can't prove it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
We can't prove something we can't perceive and measure. So that's the biggest question here.
You can't prove anything that you can't be there for. There's no way. It completely goes against the scientific method.
Right. But even if we were there to perceive it, we can't prove that the quantum version is incorrect because it's such a wild ride. It's a wild ride. So, bouncing off of this, the Eugene Wigner thought experiment happened in 1961. It is basically a redo of the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment, and it is proposed that the consciousness of an observer is the demarcation line which precipitates collapse of the wave function. This sort of gets a little deeper into saying that the observer collapses the waveform or collapses superposition into a specific outcome because of consciousness. And we could try and define consciousness if we wanted to, and I do want to. Trust me.
Another episode, we promise.
And another episode. We can't do it all. But this is commonly known as consciousness causes collapse. The interpretation of quantum mechanics that states that observation by a conscious observer is what makes the wave function collapse, allows two observers to experience different realities of the same event, and that the observer himself creates the event that occurs through consciousness.
Right.
So this is sort of questioning the idea, can objective facts even exist if this was true?
I was thinking about this recently, about how this implies a few different things. So if consciousness is causing this collapse, and we are to assume that in this theory the two different observers cause two different kinds of collapses, which would therein imply two different kinds of consciousnesses, but then also implies that consciousness itself has a sort of wavelength that interferes with what's perceived. And to simplify this idea, I feel like this is the classic, well, is this actually red, or do I see red and you see blue, but we both know it's red? So,
well, if one of us is colorblind.
Well, if one of us was colorblind, we'd see brown anyway.
But how do we prove that we're both seeing different colors of red, different shades of red?
We can't.
We can't.
Yeah, there's no way.
I mean, there might be a way that we don't know about.
I feel like that would take some digging, but as of right now, there's no way to prove that what we're seeing is not the same thing.
We haven't collapsed that wave function yet. I think I'm going to start referring to I don't know as we haven't collapsed that wave function.
No, I think that's a good way to find our people out in the wild.
So Wigner, I don't know. Wigner shifted later on. He said, maybe consciousness doesn't cause collapse because he was worried that it would lead to a kind of solipsism. We are the center of the universe and we create things that are happening. It's like, it could lead to a kind of...
Yeah, I mean, you can get a little bit high on the idea that, my consciousness is causing these things, if you, lean into it a little bit much, and I can totally see where that would come from.
Well, he was worried that people were going to try to apply quantum physics to the scale of everyday life.
Exactly.
He was going to say... I don't know if you can hear that, but that's her mourning dove.
What did we name her earlier? Chef?
I named her Chef because it's an acronym SHF. My cat's name is Sparrow. And I named her Sparrow's hypothetical food because our cats are indoor cats, and Chef has a lot to say about quantum physics. I have to say, she's quite the learned bird herself.
She's experienced.
Anyway, Wigner didn't want people to assume that just because things happen on a microscopic level doesn't necessarily mean that they apply to everything.
Yeah.
Which is sort of where sometimes we sort of get in trouble in the New Age community.
Oh boy.
And I'm not going to go too deep into this, but, you know, there is a little bit of cherry picking when it comes to spirit science, quote unquote, and I don't like that term either. We try to fit our beliefs into these little boxes of like, it's hypothetical in quantum physics, so you can't necessarily prove me wrong, and here's this, and this, because quantum this, and this, and you can go really, really deep into
that. You can get lost.
You can get very lost, and, you know, Wigner was right. You know, there is the danger of spiritual solipsism, and in the circles that I'm in, I see it all the time. So,
gotta be careful about that one.
To wrap up those two, we're going to get into some of the more out there, wacky theories here in a minute. The more exciting ones, so to speak. But to wrap up that segment of it, therein lies a paradox in quantum mechanics that opposes the scientific method, which is based on observable facts, measurable results, and experimentation. Quantum mechanics is built on the role of the observer and how measuring the behavior of particles changes depending on its being measured. This is how we can reasonably approach the idea of anti-realism. However, there are obviously some problems in this approach as well, as it can lead to what some could consider dangerous thinking in terms of worldview, spirituality, etc., such as solipsism, meaning that one can only know one's mind, and if this is true, then all external forms can be called into doubt and may not exist at all. This is called the problem of other minds. So that's that about that.
That's that about that.
Now we're going to talk about some of the more fun ones.
Yay, fun!
These are called the skeptical hypotheses, and they originate in philosophy, suggesting that reality is very different from what we think it is, or at least we cannot prove it is not.
Yeah. There's no way to say that this is wrong. There's no way to say that it's right either. So it just exists in a gray area of maybe.
The first one is called the brain in a vat hypothesis. Mm-hmm. So suppose that a neuroscientist sneaks into your room at night, drugs you, kidnaps you, and takes you back to his evil lair to remove your brain and put it into a nutrient-rich solution. Of course it has to be nutrient-rich.
Yeah, you gotta keep your brain alive.
He hooks it up to a machine and uses electrical impulses that can trick your brain into believing it's living normally. This operates under the assumption that we don't need a body to experience life. We assume that consciousness comes directly out your brain. You'll electrical meat ball.
Electrical meat. It's fat. The brain is fat.
It's disgusting. So when we see an object, it reflects light back into our brains, which process the information and forms an image we can interpret as the object. Consider, we don't need this process if we can artificially create this image in our brains. We can even measure emotions by looking at the chemical reactions in our brains. So how can we be sure we aren't just a brain in a jar? I think, therefore, I am.
You're going to notice on the episodes that I appear, I'm going to talk about both The Good Place and Black Mirror quite a bit. There is the episode of Black Mirror with Miley Cyrus. I don't know that you've seen this. Black Mirror kind of freaks you out.
I don't like scary things.
She does not like scary. I, however, love them. But it's the episode in which Miley Cyrus is a pop star, who'd have thought, and she is thrown into a coma by her aunt, and they keep her brain alive so that her brain can create songs for her. And they also try to duplicate her mind into software and put it into these little dolls that are supposed to be like animatronic versions of her. And it gets very spooky. And the idea that you can take your brain out and use it to operate independently, I think is really well represented in the machine, especially the idea that you can take these emotions and turn them into songs. Totally out there. And there's no way we could do that at this point, if it's possible at all, but I thought that was a pretty good demonstration of how that could theoretically happen.
Yeah. Again, can't prove it. I'd rather not this be the case.
Yeah, I'd really rather not. That's kind of bleak, isn't it? I'm not sure that I like that.
And this sort of bounces off of that. There's, of course, the dream argument of Descartes and Zhuangzi. I'm going to just take the L on that one.
Yeah, just
It supposes reality to be indistinguishable from a dream. Basically, we can't trust our sense perceptions. When we're dreaming, we don't know that we're dreaming unless we wake up and become lucid. How do we know we aren't dreaming now? This isn't a dream you can pinch yourself out of. Some think death is the only way to wake up. And quick tangent here, I don't know if anyone has seen The Midnight Gospel.
Yep.
I'm currently taking a lot of inspiration from that show. I adore it. I love Pendleton Ward. I love Duncan Trussell. It is a brilliant show. Made me cry like a baby. Highly recommend it. But it's basically based in Duncan's podcast. I think it's called the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. I'll come back and correct myself if I'm wrong on that. But he's talking a lot about the same stuff that we're talking about here. A lot of esoteric stuff, philosophy stuff, spiritual stuff. And I was listening to the one about, well, he was interviewing Dan Harmon. And they went from coronavirus to talking about reincarnation.
As we do.
They were talking about how, when we die, what if we just woke up in a dirty old bathroom coming down from a really, really bad trip on like ayahuasca or LSD
or peyote,
peyote or something like that, and we are a whole nother person living a whole nother life, and we just hallucinated that entire life.
Good God,
that's ultimate nightmare, dream within a dream, Inception, crazy BS. Terrifying.
That's bleaker than the brain in a jar, personally.
Well, I mean, I guess if you wake up to the fact that that is your reality, then it wouldn't be so scary, you know what I mean?
I guess.
And then you could deal with it. I guess that's why the Buddhists are always telling us to chill out.
I guess I'm just really not into the idea that this whole thing has been just like a terrible K-hole the entire time. Like, that is not...
I think, well, the scary part of it is it kind of takes the meaning out of it a little bit.
I know. If this is all just like synapses misfiring, I'm going to be a little bit bummed.
Yeah.
Maybe relieved.
What if we are just thought forms? What if we are all just thought forms within thought forms within thought forms? Would it really be that bad? Would it really be that meaningless? If we attune meaning to our own lives, no one can really take that away.
I mean, I'd agree if we just, like you said, prescribe meaning to ourselves, and I think that's good enough. Also,
I didn't mean to get a little preachy there. But,
whoop, we went somewhere with that one.
But yeah, it's scary. I was trying to save it, but it's scary.
It's horrifying.
I'm going to let you, Olive, talk about the Descartes evil demon theory.
Oh my God, this tickled me. Oh gosh. So essentially, Descartes, he of the Cartesian plane, had a lesser-known side to his philosophy where he believed that his perception of reality was controlled by what amasses to an evil demon, chasing him, controlling him, and it basically has a hold over his fate. So he believes that nothing he sees can truly be trusted or believed, because it's being controlled by something other, something malignant. The idea to me that the same man who gave us the Cartesian plane was being kept awake at night by a living, breathing, sleep paralysis demon absolutely tickles me. I love it. Terrible for him. I back this theory, for the record. I think it's wonderful and also horrifying.
I kind of feel bad that he thought life was so awful that, of course, it had to be controlled by an evil demon.
That's terrible. I mean, God. But creative, and also I would have loved to catch a drink with this man, quite frankly. What a multifaceted individual. Like, can you imagine? I mean, as far as, like, if we're talking about the brain in a jar or the bad trip the whole time versus evil demon, I gotta say the evil demon really does it for me. That's amazing and honestly audacious. And that can also be brought back to that moral solipsism. He thought his was so... he thought his reality was so bad that it had to be something malignant, that his perception had to be the way things were. just because things were so bad. And I've heard that a lot from other people, but also, the creativity on that one. Gotta pour one out for poor Descartes. I hope the demon has released him at this point.
Well, I want to get to mine. My favorite hypothesis.
Okay, your turn.
And it's a lot of people's favorite. I don't claim to be special. It is the matrix hypothesis, or simulated reality hypothesis.
Woo!
We're just Sims in a computer. This was developed by Nick Bostrom, and it operates under 5 assumptions. Just 5, just in case.
Just given this thing, let's see how we can justify
Assumption number
matrix.
1. It is possible to simulate consciousness. Mm-hmm. We don't know what consciousness really is, so we have to assume that we can simulate it by creating a brain with a computer. This assumes that consciousness is found in the brain, which is highly disputed, to say the least. So that's assumption number 1. This has to be true for this to happen. Assumption number 2, that technological progress will not stop anytime soon, so that we can create computers that can simulate consciousness. This is assuming we don't destroy ourselves first, which is assumption number 3. We would have to pass the quote-unquote great filter of civilizations. This comes from the idea that all great advanced civilizations destroy themselves eventually, be it war with each other, a big old meteor, disease,
extraterrestrial intervention.
Extraterrestrial intervention. I'm
really glad that you brought out the vocoder just to do that. Thank you.
I love the vocoder. Sometimes I forget I have it. That thing cost me $250, and I was going to use it for my music project, but it hasn't presented itself an opportunity yet, so I am using it for comedic effect in my podcast.
All right, Daft Punk, calm down.
$250. Anyway. Assumption number, what are we on, 4?
Yes.
Advanced civilizations want to run a simulation. So why would godlike beings, because that would what they would have to be at that point. They're basically creating consciousness in a computer, which is godlike, to say the least. They are creating life, or quote-unquote life. Why would they want to experiment with us?
Ooh, I had a lot to say about that.
Go ahead.
Okay, so, sorry, I'm drawing a lot of parallels to media. Listen, Riley does the philosophy. I just run with what tickles my fancy. But there was...
I don't watch a lot of TV.
I consume so much media. I'm a Gemini. It's just what I do at this point. And also we're in quarantine. So there's a movie that I really like. It's a few years old at this point, called Artificial Intelligence. And the only thing that's really important or relevant to this is the last 15 minutes, but I have to set you up. So basically... there's a family, and at this point in the future, they have been able to harness consciousnesses and put them into robots that simulate people. So these are robots that can sort of feel things. They can learn to be people, to replace people who are missing, etc. So eventually this little boy robot gets abandoned after a whole rigmarole of circumstances, and he gets frozen in a block of ice. Thousands of years later, these alien beings unearth him, and they place the little boy in a simulation that they have created from the little boy's consciousness, of, like, his human mother, etc. And the aliens at that point had been doing this with basically most of human society, because human society ended up destroying itself. So they were running these simulations in order to basically study us as anthropologists, and running, like, basically diagnostics in different parts. Like, hey, what would happen if we did this? What would happen if that happened? Because they were able to access consciousnesses that had somehow survived, and they wanted to run this experiment just to basically to see what would happen. It's kind of like the clockmaker theory in the fringes of Christianity, where God made the universe and just said, all right, cool, run with it.
Yeah, well, in the Law of One, the raw material,
oh boy,
which is going to be a whole nother episode, because I adore this book in all of its craziness and faults. It has... Okay, so for those who don't know, the Law of One is a channeling, and channeling is when a person sort of changes their state of consciousness, sort of like meditation, sort of not, and a being from another plane of reality, be it an extraterrestrial or an angel or some being from another higher plane, is speaking through this channel.
Yeah, some sort of entity.
It's different from being possessed. Possession has a negative connotation to it. It is, the idea that a demon or a ghost is controlling your body and your words and things like that. It's not possession, it's channeling. There's a lot of this in the New Age community. There's a lot to talk about it. Not going to happen today. The Law of One is a channeling of Ra. And you can kind of think of the Egyptian god Ra. It is a god... collective consciousness is basically what it is. It's an extraterrestrial. If you're a fan of Ancient Aliens, you kind of know about this. Ra says, according to this book, which makes no claims to be fact, by the way, which is a very important thing to say.
Yep. Very important.
There's no way to prove it, no way to disprove it. It is not. It sounds like nonsense. It really does.
It's a tough read.
It's a tough read. But basically, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, who we think of when we think of the Bible, the Quran, the Torah. Earth was an experiment to Yahweh. Yahweh wanted to set up a paradise, a world where there is no war, hate, love, or hate, whatever. A utopian world, so that his creations wouldn't have to suffer. And that backfired because, according to Ra, the purpose of existence is to ascend and learn lessons, and you can't ascend if there's no lessons to learn. So an outside force had to come in and bring the snake, or Satan, to start conflict and therefore allow ascension to occur. Again, that's a really wacko one, and one that I really want to talk about in another episode.
Yeah. I really want to get into that one. I have a lot to say about
but
the why would as well.
Why would they want to run a simulation? To see what could happen. I don't know. Once you get to a certain level of existence, I assume you're kind of bored.
I mean, why do we play The Sims, right?
Yeah, we should be doing a lot more productive things than playing The Sims.
Maybe the aliens are in quarantine too, and they just have to do the same thing we're doing with Animal Crossing or whatever it is they're playing.
I heard someone on the internet say they're trying to fatten us up through this quarantine so they can harvest us.
Oh my god, that's horrifying.
Delicious.
I hate that.
We are delicious. Dominoes. Assumption number 5. That was a long tangent. Assumption number 5. If there are a lot of simulations, you are probably inside one. Basically, if the other 4 assumptions are true, it is likely that this is a simulation. Yesterday, I saw a video on the YouTubes.
On the YouTubes, as we do.
From Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I'm going to try to play a clip from it. I'm not going to play the whole thing, just a little clip. But he talks about this, and then he also talks about this other guy, forget his name, one of his friends he went to Princeton with, had a counter argument to the, or let's say a devil's advocate's perspective on it. Because Neil deGrasse Tyson jokingly said that he was convinced that we were in a simulation, that statistically it seemed overwhelming, a gajillion to 1 that we are in a, simulation. And then he says, but my buddy from Princeton said something very compelling. We cannot simulate ourselves yet, correct? And the base of this hypothesis is that each AI collective is creating another AI collective. They're creating another simulation with another simulation with another simulation all the way into infinity. But we haven't gotten there yet. So we either have to be the real one, or we have to be the last one that is still developing this technology to create another matrix reality. So the odds of that, 50-50. Doesn't make me feel any better, but it made him feel a lot better.
I don't know why it made him feel any better. It made me feel a little bit worse.
Yeah. Because, if it was at least a gajillion to 1, then you're like, all right, it's a simulation, and we can work towards accepting that.
Yeah.
But now that it's 50-50, it's like,
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Who's to say?
I don't know. Who's to say? Don't steal my catchphrase.
That's Olive's catchphrase.
Thank you.
Mine is, that's that on that.
Seriously, at this point.
Well, that's about all I have to say. We're just scratching the surface, obviously, with these things, but I think that's a pretty good overview of where we're at.
Yeah, a good abstract, basically, of the different arguments of where we're at, why we're at, when we're at. When we're at's a different episode, which I'm very excited for.
But does it matter?
Does it matter? It might. Who's to say?
Depends on what matters to you.
Honestly, at the end of the day, that's all it is.
You know, we can't prove a lot of things, but we can decide what matters in our hearts.
And at the end of the day, isn't that what matters most? Live, laugh, love.
It's not all the bad drug trips and reincarnation that we have to go through in a hellish nightscape of eternity.
Hellish nightscape, that's dramatic. It's not that bad.
But it's the friends we made along the way.
It's all about the friends we made along the way,
It's
honestly.
all about the friends we made along the way. And, you know,
or created in our heads.
If that'll be that on that. And if you are interested, please subscribe to As Within, So Without. You can find us on all the places that you get your podcasts. We have a website.
I do the blogs.
Olive will do the blogs. We're going to release those every other week. We're going to release the podcast the alternating weeks. We are aswithinSoWithoutPodcast.com. You can contact us on there. You can subscribe to our newsletter, which I highly, recommend that you do. Mm-hmm. We'll keep you up to date on when we're going to release things, who we're going to be interviewing, just a little bit of stuff ahead of time, just so you know what you're getting into. So yeah, drop me a line, suggest things for future episodes. Tell me what you thought about this one. This one was going to be a little rough. It is our first podcast. We're sort of figuring out how to do it, and I appreciate your patience. And
I had fun.
Yes, it was fun. We hope you enjoyed it, and so we'll catch you next time.